ajax.spinspire.com. So that is my website address, and this is my little web application. Obviously it's not much to look at. Let's start by running SSH the user foo at mweb.spinspire.com, and it says, do you trust this? I say yes, and I'm in. Great. So I'm able to log in. If I look at my home directory, there is mweb. That's the little, if you see in the foo at server 3 or mweb, this one, mweb.spinspire.com. If you look at the mweb directory, let me cd to it, and here there is index.html, which contains the very same thing that is here. Okay, so I can edit it all this, but I'm not going to. I'm actually going to use Netbeans to do that. So let's fire up Netbeans. I am about to show you how to configure your Netbeans so that you can edit this project. Let's get started. First, you hit new project in Netbeans. Remember, you need the full version of Netbeans with PHP and everything present. I hit PHP, and this PHP application is from a remote server. That's good. So let's next. The name of the project is mweb, as in modern web. The source folder could be any place, but I think it's okay to take the default. Just make sure you check this checkbox, put Netbeans metadata into a separate directory. The benefit is that your project data, project files will not clutter up your source code. I think that's a good thing. Hit next. Now comes the important part. You have to give the URL where your project is running, and that is this URL. So let's select this URL, copy it, and paste it here. So it's basically http://foo or whatever your username you used .mweb.spinspire.com. Now the remote connection, you'll have to create your own remote connection. Click manage and add a new remote connection. The connection name, let's call it mweb, because that's the server we are connecting to. Make sure the connection type is SFTP. Click OK. The host name will be mweb.spinspire.com. Username will be foo. Don't give a password because you are going to use your ID RSA key, and then you can use the same known host. You can now, when it comes to initial directory, it will be, make sure it is home/foo or whatever the username that you're using. Let's test the connection, and connection succeeded. Great. Click OK. Make sure you are using the mweb remote connection. Now the upload directory will be /mweb, which basically means /home/foo/mweb. Keep in mind that foo is my username. You could use some other username. Click next. It's fetching the entire project. Click finish, and with that you have a local copy of the project. Just make sure one thing, go back into customize, and then upload files is on save, which is fine. You can uncheck this checkbox, upload files directly if you like to. Click OK. Now right now in my browser I can see hello modern web development. I can just put, and which is this string here, I could just put another heading 2 here and saying this is new. So let's say heading 2. As soon as I save it, watch what happens. It's uploading the files that I'm saving here up to the server. So now when I refresh, I see this is new. This is great. We are in business. Any changes that we make within Netbeans will be reflected on our website. So, but before we go very far, let's understand the logistics of what we are doing. Make sure that you visit the mweb.spinspire.com website. There are some instructions in there. Follow those. There are 3 things we will be following. We will be following this document. It's a Google Doc, and it describes what we are doing, why we are doing it, and how to do it. So the current steps are, there are many, there are like 30 plus steps. We'll get there, and then also make sure you open this Git repository, and in the Git repository you can go to source or you can go to commits, and these are the commits. Start from the very beginning, the first commit, which is the initial commit. Okay, and then finally there's a link to the video. Obviously I am recording that video right now, so this link is not functional, but by the time you watch this video, the video link will also be functional. Like I did at the very beginning of the screencast, you can create a new username, user account, and then make sure you paste your public key in here, and then you will be able to log in as basically like SSH username, which is foo in my case, at mweb.spinspire.com. So once you do that, so you'll be able to log in. Okay, so then we went ahead and configured Netbeans so that we have a local project that every time you modify and save, it gets uploaded to the remote site, which is this site, username.mweb.spinspire.com. Okay, so I will go ahead and remove this h2, and then as soon as I save it and I refresh, that addition is gone. Now let's take a look at this repository. Look at the initial commit. The link to the repository will be again in that document, mweb.spinspire.com, but let's look at the commit. The commit says this is all the commit has, which is stuff that we have put in this index.html. Okay, so if you want to see the structure of this the project, you can see it in your Netbeans projects mweb directory. It has nothing special, it just has index.html, and then this is the Netbeans project file. Anyway, so let's keep going. Next, this is nothing modern. This is just an index.html file that gets served when you visit foo.mweb.spinspire.com. Step number 2. Hit back and back again. Let's take a look at this next commit. This commit, if I see side by side diff, it will show me what I have done. I'm basically adding a form. Okay, so let's start adding the form. Right here, form. As you know, HTML forms are the right way for you to interact and send information to the servers. Okay, so right now it's locking up. So in this form, we will put a few fields, I guess, and let's start with, let's say we are trying to write a ticket purchase form. Okay, so we just put a label saying buyer name, close the label, put an input, type text, and you can say name of the field is buyer name, and close the input. Let's save this and see how it looks. Alright, so that's what it looks like. I can type the whole thing, or I am just going to copy paste this. I have already typed it, so why not? Alright, so there it is. So once I save this, let's go to the server. I saved it, so it gets uploaded to the server, and now if I reload, I see this. So this is step number 2, where we turned a simple index.html file into a simple HTML form. Nothing special, standard. But in the next step, we will, let's see what we can do. We can actually include Bootstrap CSS Framework. So you will notice as soon as we include Bootstrap, the look of the form gets enhanced quite significantly. So the way you include Bootstrap is that you have to, what is Bootstrap first of all? Okay, well, first, Bootstrap, if you go to the website, getbootstrap.com, it's a CSS framework. It has its origin in Twitter company, but any case, now it is an open source project, and you can read all about it here on getbootstrap.com, and you can download it. Just hit download. I don't even bother to download, I go straight to this link. So just include this link from here to here, copy, and then back in here just paste that link. And as soon as you do that, watch what happens. This not very good looking form becomes slightly better looking. Okay, so that's decent. Next step is, but we are not taking full advantage of Bootstrap right now. To take full advantage, we have to add a few classes in our HTML, and that will enhance the look of our form quite significantly. One thing we have to do is add some class equal to container to at the body level, and class form group and class form control for each input. So let's do that. So I go back in here at body, I say class container. So I save it. As soon as I save that and refresh, as you see, you can see that because I gave class container, the content is now centered and a little bit offset on the left. So that's good. Then if I go to every div level and say class form group, and at the input level I say class form control, watch what happens. Save it and refresh. See, this is because I gave it a form control, it became a nice looking input box. Let's just do that very quickly at each level. I don't like to type, so I just copy and paste most of these things. Plus, you watching the video don't want to just watch me do the boring stuff. Okay, so I basically put class form group at each wrapper div, and each input I'm putting class form control, including select, by the way. And let's see if this works. Very nice. That's good. So look how each label is above the input, and the input is fully wide. And finally, I think adding these button classes also helps. So let's do that. So we say button class btn. Remember, these classes come from Bootstrap. btn and btn primary. And for reset, we'll just put class btn. That's it. Save. By the way, I'm pressing Control S. That's why you see this going from dark gray to disabled. And when I refresh, look, these buttons are also nice looking now. So this is pretty decent. As you can see, this is a ticket purchase form. You give the buyer name, you give buyer email, you choose a seating section and the number of seats. Let's keep going. So far, the aspect of modern web development that we have used is HTML5 and CSS3 and the Bootstrap CSS Framework. So next what we want to do is, Bootstrap comes with a powerful responsive grid. So we want to, let's do side-by-side diff, and we will be able to see. You see how you have class row and column SM6, small 6. So let me show you how that works. So we will combine two of this, the buyer name and buyer email, into a single div from here up to here, and then we give it a div class of row, and then each of these form groups we give it an additional class of col as in column, sm as in small 6, meaning Bootstrap divides up the screen, the page, into 12 vertical columns. Okay, 12 columns. So now when we say col sm6, we are saying use 6 columns when the size of the window is small or larger than small, which means anything greater than a mobile phone. So let's put the same class here on the second form group also. Save it and then refresh. As I refresh, you see, because this entire grid is divided into 12 columns, 6 columns on the left and 6 columns on the right, divides them up evenly, like divides up the horizontal space evenly between buyer name and buyer email. The great thing about this is that if I resize this browser, then until I reach the mobile size, see, as soon as the browser got very narrow, they turned into full width, but up to, as long as some width is available, they are 50-50. So similarly, I can do the same thing for the other. So let me just reformat. If I right click and say format, it formats it nicely, and now I can once again keep going and say div class row, which is the grouping, single row, and then close the so number of the seating section as well as the number of seats together, and then I just say col sm6, 6 column for small and up, and then let's see, save, reload, and now you have 50% for buyer name, 50% for email, 50% for seating section, and 50% for number of seats. The great thing is, when the width gets smaller, they basically expand to take full space. This is the responsive grid that Bootstrap provides us. Alright, now that we have seen how the responsive grid from Bootstrap helps, let's get back to HTML form processing again. So what we will do now is we will start posting this form. Now, in order to first, let's take a look at the form and see that it has various fields that have the name attribute. Okay, it's very important. Make sure that you have the name attribute in each of the input fields, because if you don't have a name attribute, then the form, when the form is submitted, these fields will never get submitted. They must have a name attribute in order to get submitted. Alright, so next let's look at the next step that we are going to make, which is adding form submission and processing. So what we will do is, in our form we will add an action attribute, and of course we will also add a form test.php. So let's do that. First, in the form, let's add an action attribute. Action attribute is what basically tells the form when the form is submitted where to send the data. So this is form test.php. Okay, so this is our first brush with PHP. I'm assuming that you have configured your web server to be able to execute PHP. But if you are using MWeb, my MWeb server, then you don't have to worry about that. It's already configured. So what this says is that when the form is submitted, let's submit the form, right? So let's just put something in there and submit the form. Okay, so that didn't submit anywhere. I have to refresh. So let's refresh the form and submit, and then it says test form test.php, and then all the fields are there, and it says file not found, of course, because the file doesn't exist. Let's create a PHP file called form test.php. extension is automatically added. Submit, finish, and when it gives you an empty template like this, just remove the boilerplate stuff and simply print _r, which is a PHP function, and then the item you want to print is $get. So this $_get in all caps is a super global, and print _r simply prints every it's a function to print data structures, and it prints the array or object or whatever complex data structure that you give it. Okay, so let's save this and go back, and now hit submit again. This time it does not say file not found. It actually shows you every part of what you had submitted. Buyer name is test, buyer email is nothing, seating section is nothing, seating section is premium, sorry, and number of seats is nothing. Only problem is this is not how I really wanted to see it. If I do view source, this is how I really wanted to see it, but it didn't show up like that. Why? Because when the PHP page returned the text, the browser interpreted that text as HTML, and as you know, in HTML, new lines don't actually break the line. So to fix that problem, all we have to do is put header. So let the PHP tell the browser that the content type of the response is text/plain and semicolon. So header is the PHP function that will generate an HTTP header. This is the name of the header, content type, and this is the value of the header, text plain. So once you save that, and now when we submit the form, there you go, we received a response, and the response had a content type of text plain, and that's why it shows up in a more legible manner, and not doesn't get interpreted as HTML, and therefore new lines really mean new lines and line breaks. Okay, all right, let's see what's the next step we want to take. So finally, there are a few other PHP super globals. I showed you that you can print $get. There are a few other super globals. Let's try them out. So there is the get. $get means all the parts of the get request, and then you can print $post, which of course will be empty unless the request is a post request, or print _r $request, which is a combination of all get and posts parameters. Let's save this, and now when we go back and let's say 5 seats and some email address, hit submit, and this is the $_server. The important things in this are script name, or rather request URI. Look at the request URI, and then document root, a lot of server related stuff, as well as some of this comes from the request. This is the $get with all the 4 parameters. This is $post, which contains nothing. It's an empty array because we did not post. You have to understand that when a form has no request method specified, then it defaults to method equal to get. So that's why $post array is empty. And this is the $request array, which is, like I said, It's a combination of get and post parameters together, the merge of the two. So if we wanted to see the post parameters, post instead of a get, let's go back here. Let's do inspect element. As you know, inspect element is one of the features of Chrome as well as Firefox. Nowadays Internet Explorer also has it, but I think these other browsers are far ahead. So if I now hit submit, watch what happens. This is a get request. You see, the other thing that happens is all the parameters of the form, all the input parameters, they end up on the query string. That is the nature of get requests. The post requests, and which is exactly what we are going to try now, go to form and add a method attribute and give it a value of post. So if I save, now when I hit reverse, and then of course I have to refresh in order to make it a post, and if I now at this point, let me clear this network tab. I want to show you what happens when I hit submit. Okay, I hit submit. You see nothing on the query string. That's because the form request method is post, which means the request parameters go in the body of the request. So if I show you right at the bottom, do you see this? This is the form data. You can see it in source form, and it's probably very hard for you to see, but let me. Oh, okay. Now hopefully you should be able to see this. This is the form data. As you can see, there is an ampersand. This looks just like your query string, except it's in the body of the request, so it's not in the browser's address bar. Okay, so that is your post request. Let's see what else we can do with this. So here in the next step, we basically converted to method equal to post, which we already did, and then so let's do a recap. We have a form, HTML form, as you can see, with various name attributes on each of the input fields, and the action is very important, which the action is form test.php, method is post, and form test.php doesn't do a whole lot, just prints a few super globals: server, get, post, and request. Alright, so as we promised, this is about modern web application development. So next we take on another, just like Bootstrap, another modern framework called AngularJS. Let's go to angularjs.org, and AngularJS is a JavaScript framework that allows you to develop web applications in a very advanced manner with a lot of interactive features. So if you hit, this is basically what sort of like jQuery, but jQuery has been around for at least 10 years now, and AngularJS is the new kid on the block. It's not that new anymore. It also has been around for a few years, but it allows you to do MVC, like model view controller development, in JavaScript. So let's go to angularjs.org, hit the download link, and don't actually download anything. You can just use AngularJS directly from their CDN link. So let's go to our HTML file and include in the header script src equals, and then paste the AngularJS URL and close the script tag. That's it. That includes AngularJS. There's one more thing you need to do. An application is not an AngularJS application until you put the ng-app attribute in any of the DOM elements. Wherever you put ng-app attribute, everything below that becomes controlled by AngularJS. So let's save that, and now when we go to the web application, refresh, nothing interesting happens really. It's the same. So in order to do something interesting, what we have to do is we have to actually bind these input boxes to a model. Okay, so now this is going to sound a bit strange, but but bear with me. So you have input type text. Imagine that this is a purchase transaction. Of course it is. They're trying to buy tickets. So the name of this input field is buyer name. Let's bind it to and for that you have the ng model and Angular model, and then you say purchase dot name, I guess, yeah, buyer name. So what we are doing is we are imagining that the current scope, the ng app application scope or the controller scope, has an object called purchase, which of course we never created, but let's imagine that there is one. And then in that there is a field called name. And what we are saying is that this buyer name input box is bound to purchase.name. Similarly, let's just copy this and paste it a few times. So oops, what did I do? Okay, copy, and the buyer email is going to be purchase.email, and then the seating section, which is a select component, is purchase.seating underscore section, and number of seats, which is another input box, text box, is purchase.num underscore seats. So now at this point we have bound multiple input fields with the model fields. Okay, but in order to actually use the model, let's add a div. So here's a div outside of the form, and we say in this div, let's say summary h3 or whatever. What is it called? Let me see. So yeah, we just say h2 purchase summary, and so h2 purchase summary. Okay, heading 2, and then in there we say paragraph, and we say so and so number of seats in so and so section for this person at email so and so. So we say purchase. Remember, this double curly brace syntax is basically you can reference Angular expressions in double curly braces. So double curly purchase dot num seats for in purchase dot seating section, whatever, this section, for purchase dot buyer name, that is a name, right, at email, and then purchase dot email. Okay, let's see if this works. So before I go very far, you have to understand, like, once again, what we are doing is we are saying ng model and then some object dot name, some object dot email, some object dot seating section. Each of these input fields are going to basically reference this object and its field, and whatever you type into these input fields, they will modify the JavaScript object, and then that JavaScript object is being rendered, various fields of it are being rendered here in this paragraph, and it will update itself. Let's see whether it works. I go to this, refresh, nothing in section for at email. Of course it's all mumbo jumbo. Let's say buyer name is Jane Doe, so it says in section for Jane Doe at email, whatever. If I say jane@do.com, do you see as I'm typing here, the model is getting updated and so is the view getting updated. So as I select a premium section, it says in premium section. If I select 5 seats in, oh, I forgot to say seats. I can say that seats. Okay, 5 seats in premium section for Jane Doe at email jane@do.com. Now as I am typing, as I make changes, they reflect in real time on your page. That's pretty cool. This is the power of AngularJS, and it is AngularJS that is, because we have an ng app, you know, at body level, and everything under body is now controlled by Angular, which is included using this script tag. And now there is a model object called purchase, and that has certain properties. Those properties are bound to the input fields, and those properties are also displayed in this paragraph using double curly braces as the delimiter. And now as you start typing, you see real-time updates in the view. Your typing is updating the model, and the model is updating the view. Pretty cool. Alright, now that we have this, let's see how can we create a modern web application using this. Okay, so the problem is that as we were typing, you know, when we remove the name, it says nothing, and then it just skips those values. So if I wanted to put some defaults, how would you do that? So let me refresh this page. What we can do is we can basically give the double pipes, which is an OR operator, and then give a default value, say 0 seats, for example. In seating section, you can say unknown seating section. Now the problem is you cannot just give bare words like this. You have to quote them. It's a string, so you just put that string in single quotes. So when seating section is not selected, is null or blank, it will fail over using this OR operator. Show this value instead. The same way, you can say unknown buyer, again single quoted string, and then email can be unknown. Right. So once you save this, what you're doing is you're saying whenever this value is not available, use this value. When this is not available, use this value, and so on and so forth. Save this, and let's refresh. 0 seats in unknown seating section for unknown buyer at email unknown. Pretty good. As soon as we type the name of the buyer, Jane, and it says section unknown seating section for Jane. Maybe it should be unknown seating section is already there. So unknown seating section for, let's say, Jane, and email address jane@do.com. Now you can see as soon as we start providing a value, it is no longer unknown or default or anything like that. Right? So that's how we have fallback values. Next, it is typically we don't actually have ng app without a name. So in this situation, our Angular app has no name. That doesn't actually that's not a a real usable solution. So we will give a name to our app. Let's call it mweb. Save it. Now if I refresh, it will break my application. Let me show you the inspect element view also while we are here. Now if I refresh, you see there is an error. This is an Angular error. If I click on it, it says basically failed to instantiate module mweb. So what happened is I named my ng app, Angular app, mweb. Now Angular is trying to look for a module named mweb. So whatever your ng app name will be, same, there should be a module by that name. So in order to provide that module, we could just put a script at the end of the body, script, and close the script. And within this script, what we have to do is create an Angular module. So Angular dot module. Name of the module is mweb, and then you end this JavaScript, and then there is a second parameter. The second parameter is the list this module depends upon. Since we are just starting out, we don't depend on any other module, and therefore what we are doing is asking Angular to create me a module. The name of the module is mweb, and it has dependencies, which is an empty list. Let's save this and refresh, and the error goes away. So yeah, it's satisfied. Angular ng app, which is equal to mweb, it was able to create a module by that name. It's all happy. But in reality, we don't want to put our Angular module inside our HTML file. Let's organize our code a little bit. Let's create a new folder called JS, as in JavaScript, and within that let's create a new file, JavaScript file called app.js, and let's remove all the boilerplate, and whatever we were putting here in the script tag, let's put that in app.js. Okay, so that's our app.js. It contains the same code, angular.module mweb. And then let's remove the script tag. Well, actually, let's not remove it. So what we did was we took the inline JavaScript and put it off into a separate file. And here we can say js app.js. Okay, so with this, if we refresh our page, it still works. Of course, nothing really works at this point, but there are no errors at least. Now, what have we done so far? We created a new module, Angular module, okay, whose name is mweb. It doesn't do much yet, but it will. Alright, so next step is to create, remember, if you remember, I said Angular is a MVC framework, Model View Controller framework. So let's create a controller. What is the job of a controller? It is to control, provide control to the application around in this case, the view and the model. So the controller binds the model and the view together. It takes values from the view, puts them in the model, takes values from model, puts them in the view, and then does all the processing. So let's at the form level, let's add an ng controller. That's your ng controller, Angular controller. Give it some name, purchase ctrl, purchase controller, and let's save this. And in app.js, we have to create a controller. If I now try to run the application as is, it will complain that it's complaining that there is no controller called purchase controller. So I have to provide it. How do I provide a controller? You take the angular.module. This is a highly chainable object. So angular.module mweb is the mweb module. On that you call this method using dot operator, controller. Okay, controller, you give it a name, purchase CTRL, and then you give it a value, and this is the second parameter of the controller method. You go to the beginning, let's unindent this and say it's a function. Controllers are functions. So what you're providing is, you're saying this is the module, this function returned a module, you call a method called controller on that module, and you gave it two parameters. First is the name of the controller, second is the anonymous JavaScript function that makes up the controller. Okay, let's break the line and save, and now when we refresh it, it is happy, there are no errors. Doesn't do a whole lot, but just give me a second and it will start doing useful things. Okay, so let's go to the next step. So into that controller, let us do something useful with the controller. The controller, Angular is an MVC framework, but it uses dependency injection, which means you can ask Angular for certain dependencies to be injected into your controller. So the dependency we are interested in is called $scope. So what is $scope? It's a holder for all scope variables, including, if you remember what scope variables we have been using this purchase object. So we can now go to the code and say, because Angular has provided us with the scope, we can now say $scope dot purchase, and in there we can say the number of seats in this purchase object. So purchase, this is an empty object, but in there we say num underscore seats 0. So keep in mind that when we come here first, number of seats is blank, not even a 0, but a blank. So now as soon as I save this, what's going to happen is the form binds itself to the ng controller purchase CTRL, which will get instantiated. Angular will instantiate this function with a $scope variable injected into it, and this function will inject a scope variable called purchase with a property called numSeats whose value is 0. Watch what happens when I refresh. Pay attention to this number of seats field. I refresh and number of seats gets initialized with 0. If I wanted to do other things, like I could even say buyer name. I could say the name of the buyer is Jane Doe. Save, and then I could save it. So now when I refresh, the starting value of the buyer name is Jane Doe. I don't think that makes sense, so I'm going to delete it, but I just wanted to show you that you could do that. Okay, and from this point onward, whatever changes you're making in the fields, they are, since it is bound to ng model scope.purchase, if all of your changes are happening to these values. There's a pretty good trick there. Let me show you. You could inspect element and get to the form level, which is, so get to the point where the ng controller is bound. Now I don't know if you know this, but in Firefox developer tools and Chrome developer tools, $0 is a variable that indicates that is bound to the target of your inspect element. So if you are on form element in inspect element window, then $0 points to that DOM the form DOM element. So you can now wrap this $0 into angular.element and give it $0, and you can now extract the scope out of there. Once you do that, look what happens. This is the scope object on this form. It has a purchase object, you see, which has other things. But now let me type something in here. If I say Jane Doe, buyer email, whatever, some email, and if I say premium 5 seats, now watch what happens. Angular dot element $0 is still pointing to the form, and if you try to extract the scope from it, and from that scope try to extract purchase object, there's your purchase object. Do you see what the purchase object, the state is? Num seats is 5, name is Jane Doe. If I change from Jane Doe to John Doe, just say John. As soon as I do that, and now if I print the same information, this time the name is John. So this object is getting updated in real time, and that's the power of the MVC framework, that is Angular JS. So, and that's of course the value of binding, power of binding. Okay, so let's keep going. We injected scope. Let's add some. Okay, so now to make this form a little more user friendly, what we could do is, when you delete these things and when these things are not present, there may be it's a good idea to have some kind of a hint for the user. So all we have to do is go to index.html, and then in the input boxes we can add some placeholders. So we can say placeholder, and then whatever you want to say in terms of hints for the user. So in our case, we can just say placeholder your name, and yeah, must match the ID. So because they are buying tickets, I guess it makes sense for them to bring their ID, and this is the buyer's name. And you know, you could say placeholder your email, and then some kind of a hint about the email instructions basically, and the number of seats. So let's see, we go to num seats, and here's placeholder, enter the name, number of seats, number only. If I save this, and once we go to the page and refresh it, now do you see that hint in each of these fields? So when you delete this, it says enter number of seats, number only. So whenever this field is empty, you will see the hint, but as soon as you fill that field, the hint goes away. So that's the job of placeholder. Again, this is an HTML5 attribute. It's a pretty nice feature of modern web applications. Okay, so now what we will do is, currently our form index.html, when we submit the form, let's submit the form and see what happens. So if I put some information in here, and okay, so let's see what happens. I hit submit. Let's stay on the network tab, clear this, hit submit, and it actually submits just like it would any other form, nothing special, because it is not an Ajax form submission. This is a full form submission, and when we submit, it submits to form-test.php, and it is a post. All this is specified right here, as you can see right here. So that's nothing new, but you know what, let's delete the action as well as the method attributes. Once you delete that and replace it with ng submit, now that's your opportunity to convert this from a regular form submission get or post to Ajax request, or more precisely any kind of JavaScript processing. So let's create, let's say ng submit and then the parentheses. So keep in mind that any whether it is a ng model variable reference or a function call, all of these are simply methods and fields and properties of the scope object, which means in order to run it, let's go ahead and try to see what happens. refresh, I clear this, hit submit, and I should probably have, well, nothing happened. Nothing happened because there is no submit method. Let's create the submit method. Go to app.js. Remember, all these things are properties of scope. So just say scope.submit and give it an anonymous function. And that's the body of the submit function. For now, let's just say console.log. Let's say purchase is the purchase object. Now, of course, we are not passing the purchase object. Let's say somebody is passing us the purchase object. So we save this, and back in here, instead of just submit, we say submit purchase. So what you have to understand is it takes this purchase object and passes it into scope.submit method call with the purchase object as a parameter, which ends up here. And then you can console log it. Let's give it a semicolon here, save it. Let's see what happens. Refresh, file name test, email address t@y, standard section, 5 seats. Hit submit, and look what happened. This is the submit function executing with purchase object and simply printing the purchase object. Well, this is not exactly an Ajax request, but this is pretty good, pretty useful, because JavaScript captured the form submission. It didn't actually even do the form submission. It simply intercepted the form submission. So at this point, we are ready to start making some Ajax request. Alright, so in order to make the Ajax request, we need a new dependency called $HTTP. So in here, just like we asked Angular to provide us $scope, we can ask Angular to provide $HTTP. So what is $HTTP? It is Angular service that makes it possible to make Ajax calls. So let's say purchases, we log this, but then now remember we are inside purchase controller, which is a function from here to here, but then we are within that in an inner function, okay, which is a submit function. We can say dollar inside that we can use this injected service $HTTP, and then .post, we can post to, and post to what? Well, let's post to form test.php, and the object that we are going to post to it is this second parameter, and that will be the purchase object. Okay, and that should be it. Let's see what happens. Let's see. So, oh, one more thing. We are not only just posting. So this $HTTP is the service that will make an Ajax call. It will post to this URL, and it will post this object. Remember, it posts it as JSON. We'll find out very soon. But then when it finishes asynchronously, after the request has finished successfully, we want to do something, and that something is run this callback. And that's this callback. This is an anonymous function. It takes one parameter, which is the response object, not a response object, but the response body, and we will simply print console.log with the data label, print the data object. Let's see how this works. I'll take a look at it again. From the ng submit of attribute of the form, we are calling submit with the purchase object, and that submit is this scope.submit, takes the purchase object, logs the purchase object, invokes $HTTP.post, and posts it to this URL, here's the object, and only when it succeeds, which will happen asynchronously, remember this is Ajax, then when it successfully comes back, takes the data object, which is the body of the response, and logs it. Let's see. Refresh. Test. T8y plus 5. Look at that. It is logging the response. This is the response it received. Of course, the response is that plain text response that we had received. And as you can see, get, post, and request, everything is all blank. So what really happened? How come it didn't actually receive any of these num seeds and blah blah blah? Well, it did receive it, just not in the form that it expected. One thing that you must notice is the content type that we posted to it is not a form post. It is application JSON, and that's the key information about $HTTP. By default, $HTTP.post is going to post data as JSON, and that's the key piece of information. Actually, it's a pretty useful thing. Now what we can do is we can modify our test form so that it can consume JSON. So how can it consume JSON? Well, we simply check the content type. So let's do that. In the form test.json .php, I'm sorry, which say if preg match, and the first is the pattern. Basically, if you delimited the pattern with the slashes, and you say in the very beginning you have application what is it, this x www form URL encoded. So application slash, but since this is a literal slash, we have to escape it. Escape application x www form URL encoded. Let me make sure I spell it right. Yeah, it is that. So this is the pattern, and the subject string is server HTTP content type. So what we are doing here is, if the HTTP content type key value within $server, which means this header called content type, matches application slash x www form URL encoded, then do what you have been doing, which is this. So this will still work for regular form posts. Okay, and then let's duplicate this. Sorry. On the other hand, if it is application JSON that you posted, right, then my response will also be application JSON. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically read the incoming data. So to read the incoming data, I have to say in PHP, to read the body of the request, you say file get contents, and then the file that you are trying to read is called php://input. It's kind of strange the way PHP does it, but this is called a stream wrapper in PHP. So in any case, this will give you the body of the incoming request, and let's JSON decode it. Basically decode it as if this was a JSON string, which it is, by the way. And that's your incoming data object. That's the object that the requester sent to you. This will be the purchase object in our case. And then what we do, we simply JSON encode it back. Okay, but if all we did was that, the response won't reach the client, so we have to actually print it. So we JSON encode it and print it, and that will send the response back to the requester. Save this and let's give it another try. submit. There's the response. Let me try show it to you again. Let me just refresh the page. Now hit submit. That's the request object going out, and this is the response object coming in. They are obviously same, they are identical, because the form test.php is doing nothing but just decoding the JSON object on its own end and then encoding it back to the requester. All right. So this is very interesting. We are already making Ajax requests and getting back Ajax response, and we are doing it in JSON. So the outgoing data format is JSON, sorry, right there, and then incoming data format is also JSON, and we are doing all that over Ajax using this $HTTP service. That's very cool. This is what we mean when we say modern web application development using JavaScript, Ajax, and JSON. Okay, at this point we are ready to start doing some real programming on the server side by actually persisting this data that we are submitting to the server. But in order to persist data, we need a database, a relational database. In our case, we are lucky to have MySQL on the server. So let's go to the server, ssh foo at mweb.spinspire.com, and we are connecting to it. Okay, so that's good, we are connected, and on the server we can simply run MySQL. That's it. And when we run MySQL, we get logged in, and we say show databases, and that will show us this database called dev_foo_mweb. Basically dev underscore whatever the name of the user that I created. Remember, I created my user here on mweb.spinspire.com as foo, and then the name of the application is mweb. Okay, so this is my database, and I am going to connect to it. But how did it connect to the database? Is there no password? Well, there is a password, and it is in my home directory ~my.cnf, and that's my password. It's kind of long and complicated. That's because it's a randomly generated hex string. Okay, so let's run MySQL and connect ourselves to dev_username_mweb. So now we are connected, and let's create a table. So here is my table. I have again, you have access to this same Bitbucket repository, and you can see a link to it in the document that is linked from the video. So let's select this. It basically says create a table, which is called mweb purchase. It has an ID, basically primary key. It is auto increment, not null. It has a field called buyer name varchar 100. It is also not null. Buyer email, and so on and so forth. You can see everything that is there. Okay, so let us copy this from here up to here and simply run it. And that creates the table. Let's see, describe mweb purchase. So that's your table. Okay, now that we have a table, if I do select star from mweb purchase, it's an empty set. That's good. So now let's start actually sending data. We will create a new file called purchase.php. Okay, let's call it purchase.php, and in here we will actually connect to the database. Now when we connect to the database, you will need to provide a username, password, and all that. It is not a good idea to store your username and password and the database name. All these things should be external to the application. They should not be part of the source code of the application. So that's why in PHP we say we will do include once of config.php. That's the configuration of the application. And now we create a new file called config.php, in which we can keep a variable called database, and that is an array, and in the array we can put the database name, the URL, and so on and so forth. All that information is present in this file, so we'll just copy that. So that's your database array. It has a URL, and the URL in case of PHP's MySQL driver, you say ph in the MySQL : host equal to the host name, which is localhost, and database name equals your database name. And you provide a separately username and password. So let's just copy this. And I paste that right here. And of course my database name is dev_foo_m_web. My username is foo. My password is, well, it's actually present in my server. I can just cat my.cnf, it's a password that I can never remember, which is fine. And I paste that password here. It's okay if you can see my password. I'm going to change it by the time you see this. Okay, so that's my config.php, which I have included from my purchase.php. This point I can say global $database. Remember, database is in another file, so we have to reference it using global prefix, so which makes it available to us in this file. And then I say new PDO, and then name of the URL, so database URL, and then $database username is the second parameter, then $database password is the third parameter. These three things together make up a database handle. So a new PDO basically creates a database handle based on the database URL, username, and password. So that should connect us to the database. And then once we are connected to the database, we will not do anything fancy. We will do the same thing we were doing in form test, which is simply this part. Copy this, where we produce application JSON response and we consume JSON response. So let's just, and now I can reformat this. So what I'm doing is I'm just connecting to the database and going about my business as if nothing else has happened. So I'm not actually using that database. I will make use of it very soon. So let's see what happens. Refresh, inspect element, just to see what happens on the console. Okay, let's give some values. Submit, and I actually got a response back. Now hold on, I might be making some, okay, I think I made a mistake. I have not, I'm submitting to form test.php. So let's fix that. This will now submit to purchase.php. Refresh, go make the submission again, submit. It still seems to work, but is it really working? To mess up and cause an error, I am going to change the username to foo_x, and that will prevent the database connection from getting created successfully. So purchase.php will not be able to create a database handle, and hopefully that will cause some kind of an error. Let's do it again. Submit, and there you go. I got a 500 error. I know for sure that means I was not able to connect. I undo my mistake in config.php and just hit submit one more time. Let me clear this first. Yeah, hit submit, and now it works. So now I know for sure that purchase.php is connecting to the database. Alright, so the next step will be to start actually inserting into the database. Let's do that. So before we go very far, I just wanted to let you know that I am running this project with Git. So what I did was I made sure that config.php is included in .gitignore file so that it doesn't get committed to Git repository by mistake. That's something worth noting. In any case, let's keep going. Let's insert. So to insert, what we have to do is once we have the database handle, we can write an SQL statement. That SQL statement can have bind variables. I will show you in a second. And then you prepare that SQL statement, dbh arrow prepare, and then provide it with some parameters. And then those parameters, you finally execute the statement, which will insert, and then that should create a new row. Let's find out if all of this works. First, let's write the SQL statement. Let me just copy all of this code. So back in here in purchase.php, that's my code. First, I create SQL statement, which is just a string, insert into mweb purchase. Then these are the columns that I'm going to insert. These are the values that I'm going to insert in those columns. So as you might notice that values are now prefixed with colon. These are bind variables. And so there is buyer name, buyer email, seating section, and num seats. Right. So now let's pay attention to what is the object. The structure of the object is num seats, name, email, and seating section. Okay, keep that in mind. So name, this is the data incoming. Oh, by the way, we have to create a statement handle by calling prepare on this SQL. Then we create an array of parameters. Left hand side is always the bind variable name, right hand side is the value, name, then email, section. Ours is called seating underscore section, and then number of seats. And then finally we take the statement handle, execute it, and that should hopefully insert. Let's find out if it works. So before we start, let's make sure that you see there are no rows. So now if I hit submit, might have worked, might not have, I don't know. Let's find out. Select start from mweb purchase. Didn't actually work. Did not actually submit. Did it? Apparently it did not. So we wouldn't even know if it. Let's make sure that these buyer name, buyer email, seating section, and num seats, these are the buyer name, buyer email, seating section, and num seats. Yeah, they're all good. And on the server, hopefully app.js is sending to purchase.php, and purchase.php has all this stuff. It should kind of work. Let me make sure I did not make any mistake. Okay, I discovered my error. What I had done completely wrong was the $data object doesn't even exist. So all this that I'm doing has to actually happen after I have JSON decoded. So this is the right place to do it. Before that, $data obviously does not even exist. So let's save this. So keep in mind, first you JSON decode your input, then you do all the SQL stuff. And now we go back. Let me connect to my SQL again and select star from MWeb purchase, nothing. Submit, and now select star from MWeb purchase. Look at that. We have our first row. If I change this name to Jane Doe and jane@doe.com, and I go to premium section and buy 2 tickets for Jane, submit, and again select star from MWeb purchase. There it is, Jane Doe and jane@doe.com, premium 2 tickets. It's very good. Okay, so with this we are actually able to insert into our table using Ajax, using AngularJS and a JSON based RESTful service. So if you look at this application, and if I remove the name and I remove the email address and I remove the number of seats and all that, if I hit submit, it still seems to work. But of course it doesn't actually work. It actually, oh boy, it injected blanks. So what if it, okay, that's interesting. But the thing is, if it failed to insert, would it still work? So we need to first start checking some errors. Execute method returns true or false. If it succeeds, it returns true. So if execute, that's the success case, and then else is the failure case. So what we should do is we should cause some kind of an error and see if this works. So to indicate an error, we have to say HTTP response code of various failure codes exist. We will use 400, which means a bad request, and then we will let me see, describe MWeb purchase, and cannot be null, any of those, but they still have, okay. In any case, let's yeah, so let's see if anything would cause some kind of an error. We could, just to cause an error, we could remove this number of seats default of 0. Let's hope that causes an error. We just want to cause some error. So in order to detect an error, what we have to do is we have to check the return code of execute. It should be false, and then the error info is dbh.errorinfo. So we could just print that. So we take $dbh error info, right, and JSON encode it, right, and then print it. So that should, and then of course we do have to exit. If we don't exit, then it will go on to this next line, which probably is not a good thing. So save it, and I am just trying to create an error. Let's see if this creates an error. So we do everything blank. Oh, 404, that's fine. Submit, and there you go. I got a bad request response. Excellent. So this is okay. Well, let me go back to console again. So this is a 400 bad request, and if you look at the network, and let me submit again. That's the not able to see the response. So somewhere in the network log I should be able to see. Oh, there it is. So if I go to app.js, go to XHR requests, I am not able to see those XHR requests. Anyway, so but you get the point, where the HTTP response code 400 is generated because the insertion failed. If you look at this, no new insertions. Oops, sorry. Yeah, since then, unless I actually give a number here, it won't work. And did that cause a 400 error? I don't know. Yeah, I think it did. Still no new insertions. If I put some value in here, premium, then I think it will. Oh, still a problem. Good. And if I give some value here, then no problem. That succeeded. Cool. So now we have a little bit of error handling. Let's keep going. And so if we wanted to know the ID that was injected, all we have to do is assign the ID and determine it using last inserted ID. So when we succeed, we say $dbh last inserted ID, and we'll just assign it to data ID. So this way, when we insert back here, let me clear this. So when we insert, when we make the request, it's num seeds and all these values are there, but there's no ID. But then when we successfully insert, it returns back the ID of the object that it inserted. That's cool. Again, the function to use is last insert ID. So I think this is a good point to stop. We will do the rest in the next video. So at this point, I think we have achieved quite a bit. We are able to make Ajax calls, use AngularJS for real-time updates, MVC update, and make Ajax calls, JSON calls, exchange data using JSON, and all this we are able to even insert into MySQL database using PHP's PDO library. Let's continue in the next video. So please do exercise, practice all this. You can go to my Bitbucket repository. It's bitbucket.org/jitesh_doshi/mweb, and you can see every commit, all the source code. Also, this video has some description on the links, which will show you how to get all the resources and practice all this on your own. Until next time.